All right, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's session on private law liability for flawed generative and agentic AI services. We are very fortunate to have two dear friends of mine and two world-class experts on law and technology. On my left, the main speaker for this evening is Jeannie Paterson. Jeannie is Professor of Law, Consumer Protection, and the co-founding director of the Center for AI and Digital Ethics at the University of Melbourne. Her research really speaks for itself, so I will just leave it at that. And on my right is Elisa Mick from Chinese University of Hong Kong, also a dear friend and tremendous expert on law and technology. If you're not already reading her stuff, you should be. So without further ado, over to you, Jeannie.
I think in a way, I might be the warm-up act for Elisa, whose name speaks for herself. And in fact, I met Elisa many years ago because I'd read so much of her work. When I was finally in the room with her, I was really, really excited. I think I rushed up and said, "Oh, I know your work." But she was very kind and didn't laugh at me. So great to be here, and similar with Kelvin as well. I know him from his work, so I feel very lucky to be with these people with such expertise, and I also feel lucky to be at Hong Kong U because Hong Kong is lovely and Hong Kong U is lovely, and everybody's been really welcoming and hospitable. I feel really blessed to be here, to be honest. So thank you. All right, so what I'm going to speak about is private law liability for flawed generative and agentic AI services, which, because I guess I'm a private lawyer, so I'm going to speak about that topic, and I'm going to speak about technology. But you are going to have to forgive me because I'm going to do a little bit of a detour into technology itself, and I'm going to do a little bit of detour into law, into the practice of law before coming back to this topic. So this is not a lecture or a talk where I'm going to do lots of case law and case analysis. It's a little bit more about approaches to regulation. So it's a talk about how we regulate and why we regulate as much as it is a talk about private law, though the underlying concepts will be there. So I just want to do a little bit of ground clearing because I'm talking about technology. I find it really weird sitting down. So I'm just going to have to stand up because I can't talk sitting down. I think once you've been an academic for 100 years, you have to talk standing up, but I won't talk for an hour, which is the other thing that academics do. Stand up, talk for an hour. So I'll do a little bit of ground clearing first. So I've just realized I've got a spelling mistake too. Anyway, so we've got rapid advances in technology, and technology, generative AI, interacts with us in seemingly naturalistic way. But AI, generative AI, does not represent artificial general intelligence. I'm not going there, and I'm not talking about that. Generative AI doesn't have sentience, and it doesn't have legal personality, and I don't think it should have personality. And although we now talk about not generative AI, but agentic AI is not a legal agent. It doesn't have agency in the way that lawyers understand agency, and it's not an agent in the way law understands agents. So I'm not going to speak about any of those topics, and I just thought it's useful to clear the ground there. Also going to give a couple of definitions because otherwise people get confused about what I might be talking about. So by AI, I'm going to take a broad definition of AI. The definition up there is based on the OECD definition, also the definition that's been used in Australia. Engineering system that generates predictive outputs such as content, forecasts, recommendations or decisions for a given set of human defined objectives. The human defined objectives is important. AI is not operating autonomously in the way that lawyers understand autonomy, or philosophers for that matter. But it's doing those things without explicit programming. So it's using data to make predictions or decisions without humans having to instruct it to do that, but within the parameters set by the humans. And I include in AI a range of techniques: expert system, predictive analytics, machine learning, and large language models. So that's a broad definition because some people would rule out all of those except for large language models, and some people would include those but chuck out expert systems. But I'm going to include them all for our purposes, even though I am aware that they operate in different ways. generative AI, which I will be focusing on, generative AI is an AI model built using neural networks with the capacity of learning to generate content. So rather than make predictions based on data, finding patterns in data, generative AI's prediction is about how language works. So generative AI is trained on data to generate content such as images, text, and other media with similar properties to its training data. We're going to talk mainly about generative AI in the sense of text. Generative AI has been trained on lots of language in order to generate text, but without necessarily understanding about that text. Okay, agentic AI. Now, when I go to talks by computer scientists, I'm not a computer scientist, obviously I'm a lawyer. I am frequently told that generative AI is so old-fashioned. And now everything is agentic AI. And agentic AI is a multimodal system designed to operate autonomously to pursue identified tasks. And it does operate autonomously in the sense that you have chains of AIs that are able to complete more complex tasks than just a single AI model, but it's still a model. It's still an AI, so autonomous means autonomous in the sense that it completes tasks without explicit programming. It doesn't mean autonomous in the sense that lawyers or philosophers mean autonomy in the sense of having capacity to make decisions based on judgment and knowledge about particular goals that might be pursued. Okay, cool. All right, one more. Hallucinations. So hallucinations are the term that's used popularly to describe errors or inaccurate content that might be generated by generative AI. And so hallucinations are when the generative AI tool produces a seemingly appropriate answer, but the content is fabricated. So that will be where the AI says the authority for a promissory estoppel is Williams and Amadio, where in fact that's not the case. So it seems realistic, seems accurate, but in fact it's been hallucinated, or it's where the source provided for the content is fabricated, which is actually the example I gave you. So in fact, the better example would be English law recognises a doctrine of promissory estoppel that is used as a sword, not just a shield. That's a hallucinated content. And then if the authority is incorrect, that's hallucinated source. So it's ungrounded is the term that people use. Okay, so that's the ground clearing, that's the definitions. This is actually what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the AI hype cycle, which I think my dear friend might pick up on later. I'm then going to talk about the rise of chatbots and agentic AI in business. And I'm just going to do a little detour into law because I can't help myself because we're in a law faculty. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about AI harms, and then I'm going to talk about challenges for private law. Notice there's a question mark there, contract tort, and then I'm going to talk briefly about ex ante regulation. And really the theme for this talk is that when and you're going to see this come through, when one listens to regulators, when one reads some stuff that comes out of people who are developers selling products, when you read stuff that comes out from law firms, we often hear law can't keep up with AI. AI develops faster than law can manage. And I guess my comment there would be law can keep up with AI because law, at least common law, and I think this is probably to civil law, but I'm not going to talk about it. Law works by characterization. When common law is faced with a legal problem, it works on characterization. What kind of problem is that? Is it a contract problem? Is it a tort problem? Is it a trust problem? And what kind of conduct are we dealing with? So the law is very good at dealing with new concepts because it uses this process of characterization. And legislation that's drafted as standards does the same thing. We have broad-based standards in legislation precisely so the legislation can apply to changing contexts. So law can keep up with AI. The point is maybe that we might not like the consequences of the law that's applied for AI. We might not like it. We might say, as a society, we don't like that outcome and we want to change it, or we think that our outcome is not one that sits with our social values, or it doesn't produce outcomes that we like for society. So we might want to pass a law, or we might want to introduce a law to change those outcomes. But that's a very different proposition to there's no law. So we don't like the outcome just means change the law, but it doesn't mean there's no law. The relationship between the parties is still regulated. Okay, so here's a hype cycle. It's the Gartner hype cycle, and your eyes haven't gone funny. It's actually blurred out. And it's blurred out because I didn't pay money to buy the whole thing. I just got the free version of the internet, actually. But anyway, I don't think I'm breaching copyright because I'm acknowledging it. But that's why it's blurred. But I think it's interesting. And this goes to my point again about can law keep up with AI and what's, is agentic AI the new big thing? Because if we look at the hype cycle, I love this because it starts with an innovation trigger. And then we move to the peak of inflated expectations. And then we go down to the trough of disillusionment, which I think, like the idea, I think academics often sit in the trough of disillusionment. And so do PhD students who are in their final year of their PhD often. Then we go up the slope of enlightenment, which I'd love to go up the slope of enlightenment personally. And then we end at the plateau of productivity, which I probably am not at because that sounds a bit technical. Anyway, if we think about AI, generative AI, about last year, we were at the peak of inflated expectations. Well, generative AI is going to change everything. It's going to introduce new levels of productivity to the economy. It's going to have 15% improvement in productivity. It's going to change our economy. We're going to be able to do lots of different things. Now, that actually hasn't eventuated, and I'll talk about that in a minute. According to the Gartner hype cycle, we're on the way down for generative AI. We're on our way to the trough of disillusionment, which means that businesses have adopted generative AI, but it's not actually producing the efficiency gains they hoped for, which is interesting when we think about that regulation question, because I think a lot of the discussion about, can law deal with AI and how will we regulate AI? It was happening when we were at that peak of inflated expectations. So we had all these expectations of the things that generative AI was going to be able to provide and a worry about the capacity of law to deal with that. And now our expectations are going down, which means that probably law is going to be recognised as more adaptive. It's interesting. There's some geopolitics in there as well, because of course the relationship, the change between the Biden regime's approach to AI is quite different from the President Trump's approach to AI. And I think that's changed views as well about what AI might be able to do and how we should regulate it and so on. So generative AI is on its way to the trough of disillusionment. But I suspect that agentic AI hasn't quite reached the peak yet. And Elisa's going to talk about that in a minute. You can see she can hardly contain herself. I might have to stop to let her say some words. Anyway, the agentic AI is probably on its way up. It hasn't reached the top of the high cycle. So that's the context we're working in. All right, so let's talk about now some of the applications of chatbots and agentic AI with sort of that point that I've made in mind, that chatbots are the sort of expression of generative AI, possibly not performing in the way that may have been expected, but people, perhaps being either promoted or sold a belief in agentic AI. There's the hype cycle again. Okay, generative AI. If you talk to business, and I do a few talks to business actually, and you go, how are you using generative AI? This thing that is supposed to produce a 15% improvement in productivity, or perhaps a 5% improvement in productivity. It's quite interesting because actually the thing that people often talk about, we've got a chatbot. We've got a chatbot that either works internally. So KPMG, for example, has an internal chatbot that allows their staff to access the tax database. So staff go to KPMG staff, their experience of generative AI is they can ask a question about tax to their Kim chatbot, which will retrieve information from the KPM database, bring that back and summarise it for them. So there's productivity gain there because they're not having to retrieve that themselves. So there's certainly a productivity gain. They don't have to use a junior lawyer to do that, or a junior accountant comes to them. The summary may or may not be pretty good. KPMG's tax advice is probably quite accurate. So to the extent that the chatbot is retrieving from a database, its answer might be quite precise. The problem with chatbots and retrieval is that the chatbot has to understand the prompt to be able to retrieve from the database, and it has to understand the database to produce an accurate summary. So it may not be perfectly accurate, but provided the chatbot is more accurate than the junior solicitor who'd be doing the work, there is a productivity gain. But you have to make that assessment about the accuracy. And that's probably where the trough of disillusionment's coming from, because people thought they would get 100% accuracy, and instead, at least, we're probably getting 70% accuracy. And that might not be terrible. That might still be a win, but it's not the win that people would suggest. The other way that firms are using chatbots is externally. So they're using them in relations with customers. So ask Lionel from Bunnings. Bunnings is a hardware store in Australia. Telstra is our telco. They're using chatbots in interactions with customers to help start customers, raise problems, answer queries, find stuff in the store. And again, that saves there being a person. Also, there's probably some other things there, provided the chatbot is accurate, which I've said it may not. So, you know, generative AI has produced chatbots that can do some things in an organisation. But all of the tech companies are now, well, they were at the beginning of the year, they've gone a little bit quieter now, haven't they, on generative AI, had these projects that they were going to have. So we had Operator, which I think is OpenAI, Mariner, which I think is Google, and Alexa, which is Amazon. These are now, so we're not just offering you a chatbot, which is generative AI, we're offering you a agentic AI. And these are tools that are going to be able to perform a number of tasks for the user. So inside businesses, they can talk to different aspects of the business, bring together information, coordinate different aspects of the business, ordering, supply chain, marketing. And for consumers like us, they can run your calendar, book your airline ticket, order the food that you need, pay your bills without you having to sit and type for them to do it. That's what agentic AI is offering for individuals. It's capacity to perform tasks. Consumer sets the task, but the tool can go and perform the task without explicit instruction for each stages of the task. That's the dream, anyway. AI agents are also being used in research. You don't have to read all of this, but there's a big push towards using AI agents in scientific research for much the same reasons. So you have AI agents or agentic AI in research, which this is from the CSIRO, which is Australia's science research organisation. And they say they're using AI agents to do scoping or literature reviews, to extract information from those literature reviews, to take that information to trial new combinations of proteins and other potential combinations of molecules and biological, whatever you call them, combinations, compounds, that may, on the basis of existing literature, actually present advances in drug discovery. They then get the AI to select which of those possible combinations are the most likely to be successful, and then they run clinical trials or trials on the ones that the AI has predicted. So the scientists are still doing the end work of testing those compounds, those combinations of, I don't know, proteins and whatever, but the AI is helping come up with the ideas which will then be tested. That's agentic AI as well. So you have a multimodal model doing a variety of tasks without a human explicitly instructing it to do so, but the human has set the overall objective. Oops. Now, the problem here, of course, is the same problem we saw with chatbots. That idea of agentic AI works really well if it works, but to the extent that it's inaccurate or misunderstands the objective of the human, who's after all given it in, who set the objective, buy me, do my shopping, buy me an airline ticket, find a new chemical compound, the AI still has to be able to interpret and implement that. And to the extent it doesn't, then the outcome is less beneficial. It's the same as using a chatbot that's not accurate. So this is just a funny little article about who bought this smoked salmon. Somebody trials one of the AI shopping agents and finds the decisions it's made are odd from human values. It buys really expensive eggs. It buys smoked salmon instead of fresh salmon. It buys 5 packets of a dessert. it doesn't really perform the way the human would expect the shopping to be done because its parameters are different. It doesn't quite understand how a human might shop. It just provides its own interpretation of the shopping list. You can see that, you know, it's just the problem with accuracy and generative AI magnified. Now, all that's quite benign. It's just like, oh, well, the AI doesn't work as well as we liked, never mind, may have saved us time. Still nothing for lawyers to worry about. Lawyers themselves are caught up in this sort of hype cycle of AI, and I don't know what it's like here, but I would say that while Gartner says that we're on the way down with agentic AI to the trough of disillusionment, for law firms, I would say that we're still at the peak of inflated expectations for the use of agentic AI in the law. The courts are a bit further back. In Australia, the courts are very suspicious, but the law firms are quite far ahead. So, you know, and this isn't helped by the legal publishers who are promoting really heavily that we should be using these tools, these agentic AI tools. Here's co-counsel, first AI legal assistant powered by ChatGPT-4. It can handle an array of critical tasks, superior work, superhuman speed. Actually, the testing on these products suggests that sort of what I said before. I've got a shaking head over here. They're probably about 70% accurate, possibly lower than that. So they do some things, but they're not performing at the level that has been perhaps promoted. And here's the uses. You know, if you look at the promotion, more time to serve your clients, grow your business. Actually, what people are using generative AI for are summarizing documents, starting research, retrieving policies, document review and correspondence. Now, those are sort of really boring tasks. Actually, I'd be very glad if an AI would do those tasks for me because they're all quite, apart from research, which obviously I love research, but all those other things are quite boring and time consuming. So if your AI could do those quite well, it would be great, right? Even though they're low level tasks, they're not replacing, you know, the skill and judgment of lawyers. They're quite low level administrative tasks. If you could have an AI that could do those things, be marvelous. It's not clear how good the AI is at any of those things. It's the same point with chatbots. How much correction does the human have to do? And what is the loss if we're going to do economic analysis? Like what is the gain in time to the lawyer? And what is the loss in not using a human to do those tasks? Because, of course, doing those sorts of tasks is how we train junior lawyers. Now, we might argue that perhaps that's not the best way to train junior lawyers, to make them do lots of mundane tasks, but it's how we do train junior lawyers. We get them to read contracts, we get them to review them, we get them to find policies and precedents. That's how junior lawyers learn the sort of nuts and bolts of the law. So, you know, there's two sort of questions here about the gain that comes from AI, but it's certainly perhaps not the revolutionary improvement that was played, that we thought it might be. And I just noticed that I think that I noticed the Law Society of Hong Kong's put out a position paper just reminding lawyers not to be swept away in enthusiasm for this technology. The courts have put out guidance as well. So, you know, there's a concern there about overuse of this technology, particularly if it's going to hallucinate on important legal matters. All right, AI harms, since we've only got 20 minutes left, but sorry, there's lots of scene setting, but I'm setting you up for a laser. Okay, AI harms. Okay, so what are the harms of AI? An AI agent goes rogue, sabotages air traffic control and hospital systems, bringing the country to a halt. That's a movie. Sorry, you're supposed to giggle at that point because it's sort of funny. It's funny to me. That's a movie. That is a movie. AI goes rogue and brings the country to a halt is the plot of many movies, Mission Impossible, but also Avengers Endgame. And you can all have a game later and think about the movie that you know where the AI goes rogue and brings the country to a halt. At this stage in time, that's probably not going to happen. Our systems might go down. The systems that run hospitals, the systems that run airports might go down. They might be hacked. They might be ransomed. But an AI agent going rogue and doing that to destroy humanity is at this point quite unlikely. The real harms of AI are more likely to be the ones we've kind of already dealt with, which is systemic failure. The AI agents, the parts of the system cease talking to themselves accurately, so they just don't perform as expected. Workforce substitution, that's the junior lawyers no longer getting the training they require. Loss of critical thinking skills, that's what we at universities are worried about. If students are over-reliant on AI, though I would say, having talked to all the fabulous Hong Kong U students, they are really not losing their critical thinking skills. In fact, their critical thinking skills, I thought, were very, very good. Hallucination, this idea that we may have incorrect information, which is not just whimsical, it doesn't just result in too much smoked salmon or expected eggs, that it actually leads to incorrect advice and people suffer loss. And we might have misalignment, and that's where, not that so much that the AI hallucinates, but the AI misunderstands the question or task that is set for it, the misalignment where people are given positively harmful advice. And if you think that that's fanciful, it's not. There's examples of all of those problems. So in Australia, the Commonwealth Bank put out AI, sacked some people at the bank, replaced them with bots that would take calls from customers, and actually had to rehire people, rehire the same people that it sacked, because in fact the voice bots couldn't deal with the complexity of inquiries that the customers had. And in fact, you have stories of your managers had to come in and start working the call centre lines because they had so many angry customers. One of my colleagues who actually does natural language processing actually got the call bot, the chatbot, found it didn't work, and she wrote her feedback, because you can write feedback on the chatbot. She wrote a long email about how the chatbot could have been built better, because that's what she does. She builds chatbots. Anyway. Hallucination cases. This is a database, if you haven't already seen it, from Damien Charlton, which is every AI hallucination case that has gone to court. So this is not all the AI hallucinations in court, but this is that have happened. This is it's now 486 cases where lawyers have presented documents to court that contain hallucinated references that have actually been picked up by the court. So if they've picked up, this is across the world, if they've picked up 486 hallucinations in court documents, just think about how many there really are, because the courts certainly won't be picking up all of them. So that we're starting to move, we're starting to say, this is no longer trivial. This is no longer too much smoked salmon. This starts to be problematic, because if lawyers are putting cases that are hallucinated in their court documents, they may cause problems for their own clients. Their own clients' cases might not be as strong as they might have been, but those cases are becoming part of the corpus of law that we all rely on to make predictions about what's going to happen in the law. You think about it, because if those cases, think of all the cases that haven't been picked up, they're now in the law reports. So we read the law reports, we look at the cases, we go, oh, there's some cases there. Unless we go and check them, they become part of the law. And even the ones that have been picked up are still being reported in judgments. So if you have an AI that's running over reported judgments, they're going to be picking up those hallucinated cases and popping them in as the body of case law that the AI is learning from. So we can get this spiral, this sort of death spiral. Sorry, I'm doing my own hype cycle now. We get this spiral of inaccuracy. I was going to call it a death spiral, but probably I should. Okay. AI agents will be manipulation agents. Sort of talked about the alignment problem, not getting right the human prompt. AI agents are also AI agents that are going to do jobs for us, maybe even negotiate our contracts. Are the product of a commercial entity that's trying to make money out of them. So if you think about the extent to whose objectives is the AI aligned with, it's not the individual, it's the business that's making it available. And then, of course, remember I mentioned there's just the harmful advice. There's the wrongful advice, and now we're moving to the harmful advice. This is 2021. Alexa, who at that point was just a voice bot, tells a 10-year-old girl to touch a live penny with a plug. What game shall I play? Play on the road. I'm a bit bored. What should I do? Put a penny on a plug. That'll liven things up. That's such a bit. And sadly, and now I'm not laughing, sorry, I also can't drive this. Sadly, we know that there's been a number of cases where young people have committed suicide following interactions with either companion AI or interactions with generative AI, where they've been given instructions on how they might like to engage, how they might like to self-harm, and even had the suicide note written for their families by the AI. So we move from the absurd to actually sort of behaviours that we start to see can be harmful to public institutions like courts or justice and harmful to individuals. So what do we do in 10 minutes? What are the challenges for private law? Thinking about the hype cycle. We are hearing a lot of questions about liability. How on earth will we impose liability on our AI for these harmful outcomes? How can we attach liability to a machine operating with some degree of autonomy? How will liability be allocated in an enterprise with multiple elements and collaborators? How will end users be protected? These are questions that are being raised about AI. I think they're also hype cycle questions, because actually none of those are questions that are difficult for the law to answer. The law deals with those kinds of questions all the time. Because you think about what we're seeing chatbots that may give misleading advice, this is the wrong information, or inappropriate recommendations. We may have agentic AI that misinterprets goals, human goals, is insecure, it gets hacked, or malfunctions, it just can't talk to the parties. We've already broken the problem down. It no longer looks so complex, because those are all categories that the law deals with quite regularly. Misleading advice, poor advice, misinterpretations of people's objectives, malfunctions. The question of where does responsibility lie is also not entirely difficult, because while we may have many elements that are put together in an AI tool, actually the categories are quite straightforward. You have a developer who develops the product. That person makes available as a service to the person who deploys it. Somebody built the chatbots for the Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank deployed them. The Commonwealth deployed them to give information to end users. And each of those parties are in relationships that the law recognises. It's contract. And so if things go wrong, contract is the tool that can deal with the problem. And as between the deployer and the end user, it's contract, consumer protection, or torts, actually, that will deal with that relationship. So the technology is complicated, but the legal relationships are not complicated. Just because you're providing a complicated thing doesn't relieve you from contractual or tort obligations. And the tort question has been fascinating to scholars. There's lots of literature talking about tort liability for malfunctioning, poorly performing AIs. People haven't talked about contract quite enough, so just a suggestion that everybody should write more about contract law and AI. Putting the contract. Thank you. Got it. Yeah, we're making contract law sexier. Great again. Oh my God, no, we're not saying that. That's particularly not on film. We're promoting commentary and values. All right, so there's this book. Anybody read this one? Yeah, right. Okay, Ryan Abbott's book, The Reasonable Robot, Artificial Intelligence in the Law. It's a really nice read. It's a really interesting book, and he has an interesting thesis. The thesis that concerns torts is largely about self-driving cars. And self-driving cars are interesting themselves. Self-driving cars have an AI. It's what gets the car to go where it is, but it also has a thing, a body. The body is the good. And in fact, this is a robot, because it's an AI in a body. That's what a robot is. A robot is embodied AI. AI is disembodied robot, whichever one you prefer to start with. So most of the book is about a robot. It's called The Reasonable Robot. And for torts, it's about self-driving cars. Now, the reason that's important is that if you're thinking about robots and tort law, your answer, your analysis is going to go in a particular direction, whereas most AI that I've been talking about is not a robot. They're called chatbots, but they're not robots. They're not embodied. The harm they cause is not harm to human bodies. They're not running into anything. They're not squashing anyone. They're not going in the wrong direction. They're a service. They're a service, and the service is shopping, buying tickets, giving advice, providing information, doing supply chain. And in law, the distinction between goods and services is really significant. It changes the analysis. So when we think about tort liability and driverless vehicles, Ryan Abbott's analysis is this. If a self-driving car causes harm to a human, we have a number of ways that we might approach the analysis of who's liable and who has to pay damages, because that's what people who are injured want in law world anyway. We might try product liability. Product liability is strict liability with defences usually. So the question we ask was the product unsafe according to the standard product liability, which was the product as safe as a reasonable person would expect, is kind of the standard. So was the product unsafe? Car drives into somebody. No, the product might not have been as safe as we expect, assuming it drove into someone as opposed to a person jumped out in front of it. And did it cause the injury, right? So was the product unsafe? Did it cause the injury that occurred? And actually the causation question is often where product liability falls down, subject to differences, because with pharmaceutical products, for example, it's often hard to show causation. But with the car example, we can probably solve it. Ryan Abbott says the problem with applying product liability to self-driving cars, to robots, is that we may have a chilling effect on the development of that technology. Because if the expectation of safety is too high, that puts too much of the burden on the manufacturer. The product is required to be too safe, in which case there's no economic incentive to continue to produce the product at a reasonable price. So if you set the safety standard too high, if you require perfect safety from a self-driving car, must not drive into anyone, then the product becomes too expensive to develop and produce, because we can't make a thing on the road perfectly safe if it's going to drive at a reasonable speed. If you slow the speed down, we can make anything safe. So Ryan Abbott says the problem with product liability to self-driving cars is it may have a chilling effect on development. And Ryan Abbott says self-driving cars are beneficial. We want self-driving cars. They've got social benefits. And the social benefit is that people are really bad drivers. So if you can make your self-driving car at least as good as a person, if not a little tiny bit better, you won. So you don't want product liability chilling that by putting too high a standard on the self-driving car. He says, so we said we should use negligence to regulate self-driving cars, and the standard of care for negligence for self-driving cars should be the standard of a reasonable human driver, which means as long as the car is as good as a human or as bad as a human, because humans are bad drivers actually. Most people think they are a better than average driver. They're not, right? Humans, well, excellent. So as long as your self-driving car is good or better than a human, then it's socially beneficial. So Abbott says we should have a negligence standard, which is based on care. And moreover, that negligence standard should be correlated to a reasonable human driver, so as to encourage development of technology. Now, another option would be no felt compensation. But the problem with no felt compensation is that it can encourage, goes the other way from product liability, it can encourage too careless behaviour because the state's paying compensation. I won't go into that, and he doesn't talk. Now, that's all fine. You can argue about whether you like that approach or not, but my suggestion to you is it doesn't apply to services. We're dealing with AI services. That analysis about do we use product liability, do we do negligence, do we do something else, doesn't apply, because with AI services, product liability doesn't apply. Paul and I were talking about this earlier. Product liability doesn't apply. It's a service. And that's actually missed quite a lot in a lot of analysis of AI. They go, oh, we're going to apply product liability. No, you're not, because it's not a product. It's a service. Services have to be rendered with reasonable care. Now, how do we assess reasonable care? Ryan Abbott, if we took his approach, would say reasonable care is the standard of a reasonable person in the same position. So if we applied Ryan Abbott's reasonable care approach, the standard expected from a chatbot providing legal advice would be a reasonable lawyer. The standard of care from a chatbot providing investment advice would be a reasonable financial advisor. The standard care from a mental health chatbot would be a reasonable mental health support person. Now, we're never going to do that. That's a silly standard, because in the context of chatbots, we're not dealing with a substitute human. It's not on the road that it will hurt someone. It's not indistinguishable from a human. People are using these services because they are artificial, because they don't want to go to a human or they can't go to a human. So it would be artificial to assimilate the standard of a chatbot to a human, because they are not a human, and they're not even exercising the same skills as a human that are relevant to exercising skill and care, because the chatbot simply isn't a human. If you go to a robo-advisor, it's not giving you advice on how to spend your money and who you are. It's saying, tell me your income, tell me your assets. This is the investment pot you should put it in. If you go to a mental health tool, it's telling you, here's some exercises that might help you. If you go to if you use a chatbot for law, it's going to tell you, maybe this is the answer to your question based on what I found on Reddit, right? So it's just not the same. And usually there's a contract in place. All of those interactions I've described, there's a contract in place between the bot and the human, which is probably excluding liability anyway, unless you've got consumer protection law. So what standard of care should apply when an AI chatbot's providing information and advice? And I've already given to you, the standard of care should not be the same as the human, because they're not in the same space as the human. The standard of care should be the reasonable developer or deployer who can foresee and do something about the harms that might eventuate. And at this point in time, I can tell you, remember, we're in the trough of despair. We know what the harms are that can eventuate. It's not like we're surprised the chatbot gives poor advice. We know that that's inherent in the chatbot. We know it well. So we then go, well, it's fine, Jenny, you can foresee it, but you probably can't do anything about it because AI is really complicated, like really complicated is what people say. It's opaque, it's inexplicable, so on. Yes, it is complicated, but lots of things are complicated. We still impose legal duties on people for providing services in a complicated world. And one thing we do in this context is we say outcomes. It says, the outcomes are unforeseeable. So opaque, outcomes unforeseeable, fine. That might be hard to know how the AI reaches the decision, but what's not hard is that we can know what data we use to train the AI. The data used to train an AI affects the outputs. We can measure the outputs. Is it doing a good job or not? And to the extent that it's not doing a good job, we can improve performance. The whole thing about an AI model, is that humans made the model. They can change it or improve it or retrain it or put in guardrails or do lots of things to improve the performance of the model. So in fact, we can give meaning to the standard of reasonable care. We do it through systems and processes, and we do that in lots of other fields. What about upstream? Core deployer is the bank that puts it on the market, the law firm that uses it, and so on. What about them? They might say, but we can't be responsible for this complicated technology because we bought it from someone else and we don't have the expertise to manage it. Why would we be liable to the consumer? Well, the answer there is, well, you actually chose to buy it, the service, like you did actually purchase the service and you chose to make it available. But also you have a contract. You have a contract with the developer that provided the technology to you. So it goes developer, deployer, individual. The deployer is liable to the individual, but the deployer also has a contract with the developer. And contracts allocate risk according to price. That's what contracts do. So if you're worried about the performance of the AI, the price goes down. It's not very reliable. I'm not going to pay very much for it. Think you're going to get sued for using it, you put the price down. And also, contracts often draft obligations not in terms of what the technology will do, but how it will perform. It will be accurate. It will reach this level of accuracy. It will be reliable. So again, contracts are very good at responding to this. I'm nearly done. That brings me to contractual exclusions and limitations. So every contract that provides AI services will have exclusion clauses in it. I won't read this out, but this is a mental health chatbot from Headspace, which I hate, which offers mental health support or wellbeing support, but then actually excludes it. And if you read that exclusion clause, you couldn't get a broader exclusion clause. If you are in need of medical treatment, you should not use this chatbot. We're not giving you medical support. That's even though it says it can provide support for a happy, healthier you. What do we do about contractual exclusions? Well, actually, again, courts often read down exclusion clauses where they're not consistent with the headline advertising. It's not a hard problem for the law either. Now, providers of AI services should be able to define the scope of the service they're providing. I can't give you a chatbot for financial advice and expect it to be able to deal with mental health. So you can define the scope of liability. You have to do that up front, not in fine print terms. All right. Now, last comment, we may still want ex-ante upfront protections for AI, but we need to look at what existing law can do before we go there. We may say the existing law is too slow, lacks a good clarity function, too easy to contract out, and so on. And I won't talk about those things. But I can if you want. Do you want one of those? Sorry, did I just go past your slide? But my comment would be, and there's some expectations for how you might do ex-ante regulation. We can do all those things. The law can keep up with AI. Here's a whole lot of options if we want to do more with AI. But at the moment, we do have a regime that is providing some answers. And I'll stop because I've got a little bit over time. Sorry, Lisa.
Thank you, Jeannie. You need to change your slide. It's Age of Ultron, not Endgame. Oh, that's the AI. No, yeah.
Deliberate.
Yeah, spot the mistake, right?
Wrong movie.
Wrong movie. Yeah. Anyway, over to Elisa.
For very long because we want Q&A. And I'm supposed to say something that's a little bit, yes? To make contract great again. All right, okay. I also have to disagree with you at some stage, otherwise we will be accused of being like douchey academics, okay? So guys, after all this ground clearing, we have very little left. I mean, I have two pages of notes, handwritten notes. I'm going to turn them into a paper later. Okay, couple of comments regarding the hype cycle. Of course, business want to make money. They slap sexy terms on old technology because they want to sell it. So I remember, funny, this is not a made-up story. I'm sitting on a couch in Macau going to a conference dinner, almost to the day 1 year ago. And there is a guy from a partner from a very important consulting firm. We're coming back from this big AI conference, And I'm like, what is this whole AI thing? And I'm so tired of it already. And he says like, yeah, I'm also tired of it, but we can't really tell our clients that it's not worth the attention because they have all this leftover budget from blockchains. I can't make this up, okay? So there's a lot of money flushing in the system. At some stage, difficult to tell exactly when, people realized LLMs are maybe not that useful because an LLM by itself, a large language model, ChatGPT, is not that awesome. It's fun, but it can't do much for business. So let's rag it. Let's slap some retrieval augmented generation. Let's put some tool in. Let's connect it. Let's maybe make like a little chain of LLMs. Agents were born and agentic AI. It's basically repackaging LLMs and generative AI for business. Okay, I can understand businesses because, as I said, they want to make money, so they have to hype things up. But I'm a little bit annoyed, not with you, like with the lawyers in general, that we actually trust the sales and marketing literature as lawyers. You have absolutely no excuse because lawyers are paid to keep a cool head and give, reasonable advice, like duty of care, etc. Okay, but and technology is a question of fact. Learn the facts. I'm talking to lawyers now. I'm talking to the abstract lawyer, and so many lawyers are totally scared of learning about the technology that they basically believe the hype, which is kind of disappointing. So then Jeannie, Calvin, and myself have to spend our time cleaning up the mess and just telling people, look, guys, just calm down, everybody. It's not that new, and complex tech does not need complex law. And this is the only part where I disagree. Sorry. I see you're using the definition of AI by the OECD, which I'm not that happy about. Okay, it's not a new definition, but there's a very good definition from 2022 by ISO. There's a whole dictionary of AI. And the reason I like it, not because I love ISO so much, but because the definition is quite broad and it kind of signals that AI is a very, very old research field. So many people who are jumping on the hype cycle, including lawyers and business people and researchers, whatnot, they may not fully realize that AI did not start in November 2022. Sorry. Ron, please be more composed. Should we call a nurse? Okay. Okay, so it's I'm not saying that there is nothing new, but I'm kind of saying there's nothing new, because I remember in 2003, I'm going to give my age away. I am writing my PhD at the University of Sydney. The PhD students were not treated very well in the sense with this horrible windowless room. And everybody was writing PhDs on interesting stuff like human rights, maritime law. And I was the only one writing one in contract law. And I had to write this chapter on, I mean, the whole PhD was on transaction automation and contract law. So it was really fascinating, according to me. And I had to write chapters on electronic agents. And this is 2003. And I'm going through literature from from the 80s and from the 90s on electronic and autonomous agents. Déjà vu. So this is why I said, like, make contract law sexy again by reheating stuff. That was like the whole discussion died down in the late 90s and now it's back. Well, it's very good because I get to travel and be invited to places. Okay, now on the absolutely serious side, one thing that you mentioned a couple of times, and that is something that we tend to forget, because this rhetorical capture, we just say AI and we forget that this is software. Yes, I mean, we can label it anything and any way you want. This is software. And normally, Ron, you've heard this argument before. Normally, when we license/buy software, nobody would, this is what I used to do before I joined academia. I was in software licensing. You license software, you expect at least 99% reliability. At least 99%. You negotiate the 999s after the comma. So it's 99.9 something, okay? So reliability is super important. You wouldn't buy something for any serious business if it's below 99%. And this is what Jeannie mentioned. When you look at this whole generative AI stuff, even if you soup it up with external tools like, I don't know, RAG databases, whatnot, it is between 80 tops. Putting something that's 80% reliable into a business environment, this is crazy. And then complaining, oh my God, I didn't know it's going to do it because it's AI. Doesn't work. It's a software program. And somebody made a very bad business decision implementing it in the live environment with customers or intersecting with other business processes. God forbid, connecting it to any payment or any money. Sorry, am I being too much? Okay. Now, this was just a boring bit with, SLAs and accuracy. There's a more interesting bit. Like, again, Jeannie, you mentioned this a couple of times. I mean, generative AI is, okay, I never know which word to use. Is it stochastic or probabilistic? This is where I get a little bit confused. Anyways, it's unpredictable. You never 100% know what it's going to do. For example, large language models are super prompt sensitive. Now, the funny thing is when it produces unexpected output, when we like it, we say, oh my God, emergent behavior, how awesome, yes? Then, okay, or if it's unexpected, but it produces profit. Oh my God, I'm a business genius, so good. But if it produces loss, oh my God, Your Honor, I had no idea it's going to do this. I can't be held liable for the actions of my computer. Yes? Because we don't like the output and suddenly, oh my God, it's unexpected. And you want to cut the chain of liability, chain of responsibility, which brings us to a slightly different point. I'm not sure how often you read about this because I mean, I read the academic literature, I read the sales and business literature. You must have heard the term AGI, yes? Artificial General Intelligence, and we have X-Risk, P-Doom, you know, AI, Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger reincarnated as a bot, I don't know. But this is all part of a trend. Again, you create this impression that this is so awesome, so advanced, so unpredictable, that it kind of distracts from your own liability and from the fact that you made it. You create this veneer of, I don't know, artificial separation. It is so intelligent, so unpredictable, et cetera, but in reality, it is a piece of software and somebody made a bad decision by implementing it in a live environment facing customers or connecting a credit card to it. But okay, so same technology, same legal principles. If it creates loss, we hate it. We don't want to be liable for it. If it produces profit, oh my God, everything is fine. Okay. Now I think okay. I have a little bit of slides, but don't worry. I think it's only some terminological stuff. So autonomous thoughts on agentic liability. I could not help it. Okay. Now this is not following my instructions. Which one do I press? The big one or can somebody press for me? Okay. Okay. This is, what is it? A Wall Street Journal. I think September or August, okay? AI agents learn to collaborate. I used this slide, I slightly revised it at a conference on existential risk on AI. Because obviously when AI agents learn to collaborate, surely they're going to do something bad, yes? And they're going to take over the world or bring down the network or God knows what. I mean, of course they could if some not so smart person has connected them to a nuclear plant. Okay, yes, we are cooked. Now, the problem is, and now it's something more academic. When we look at the academic discussion in all of this, there's a lot of load-bearing suitcase words. The suitcase word is like a word that by itself doesn't mean anything, but we stuff it full of stuff. And then we use it as an argument and it bears the load of a whole argument. So of course, it's agents, it's AI agents, agentic AI. And then of course, we have the famous autonomy, which really makes me, annoyed. Okay, so do we need those? We kind of already know after Jeannie's presentation, we don't really need those words. Okay, autonomy. And now this thing is actually, okay, guys, a very quick one. One of the main misunderstandings relates to this term, because when you read legal literature, when you read technical literature, this term comes up as the universal justification for the agent being like a separate entity, and therefore somehow breaking the chain of causation between the person who created or deployed and the end user and the disastrous effect. So in technical writings, autonomy is a very old term, dates back to cybernetics. It's like old control theory. It concerns abstract, measurable relationship of control between entities. And it is a scale. It's not something that creates itself. It can be low on the scale, it can be high on the scale, and it's something that is chosen by humans. Okay, so there's it by itself, it doesn't act as an argument. And of course, there's no normative connotations. And I love this quote. I hope you enjoy it. One of my favorite books, Our Robots Ourselves by David Wendell. Autonomy is human action removed in time, because we want to maximize our actions for profit, by the way. And one last slide. Agent. Another, of course, agent, variations in the theme, AI, autonomous, intelligent, technical writings. A typical example of an agent is a Roomba. Now, this is a vacuum cleaner. For those of you who, I'm sorry, you look so disappointed. You thought it's going to be like a robot. I envy you. I don't have one because my apartment is too small for a room, but it would get confused and probably kill itself and jump from the roof. I don't know. But this is actually the definition from the Bible on AI by Russell Norwick, and it hasn't changed for many years. Okay, the latest edition, the previous editions, this is what an agent is. Something that just perceives his or her its environment. Sorry. So, ladies, I know many of you look very disappointed. You thought there's going to be, I'm going to say something controversial. No. So, oh my God, of course, the boing? No, come here, come to mama. So, you see, I don't think those terms contribute to the discussion. We have to use them because we get invited to conferences or comment on other people's talks. We're kind of forced almost to use them because, you know, other people use them, but they kind of, you know, just they're distractors because the liability hasn't really changed. It gets a little bit more complex, but I liked your PowerPoint. It's a contract after a contract after a contract after a contract. And of course, with a lot of exclusion clauses. But in the end, you know, of course, consumer protection and product liability has to kick in. And guys, on the right lower corner, I could not help but you have a very good looking travel agent because all the videos on agentic AI, whether you look at Perplexity, whether you look at OpenAI, the IBM video, everybody gives an example of agentic AI acting as travel agents. As if the whole world was doing like nothing but traveling. I mean, and you know what? Some of the agentic AI, you know what? I'm going to stick to Skyscanner. But on this note, with this lovely travel agent who's about to go extinct, thank you for having me.